Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Stacy Montgomery, the Capital Programs Administrator at the Maryland Historical Trust. I'm here with my colleague, Alexandria Anderson, Research Specialist with the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. Today, you are viewing the African American Heritage Preservation Program, or AAHPP Program General Overview webinar. You can find a PDF of this slide deck on our AAHPP website, and you can download it to click on all the links. A recording of this webinar is available on MHT's YouTube channel for future reference. Thank you for joining us for the General Overview webinar. This is for the FY27 African American Heritage Preservation Program Grant Round. For ease and convenience, we will refer to this program as the AAHPP grant during the webinar. In this webinar, we will review important program information, including eligibility requirements, how to get started on your application, how to best describe your project, how to develop your budget request, the internal grant administration process, and the criteria used to evaluate and select awarded grants. This program is administered as a collaboration between the Maryland Historical Trust and the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. The grant program funds capital projects for properties that contribute to Maryland's African American history and heritage. It is a very competitive grant with an allocation of $5 million a year. The grant is funded by state general obligation or GO bond funds, so the grant can only fund capital work. That means construction and construction-related projects. The maximum grant amount available is $250,000. We encourage grantees to request the amount they need to complete the project up to the $250,000 maximum. Unused funds can always be returned, but most projects will use all awarded funds. The links to the online application are live on our program website now. The application is due by 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, July 1st of 2026. Please submit your completed application as early as possible in case you encounter any issues, so we can assist you in resolving them before the application deadlines. Grant staff are not in the office or checking emails late at night when the application is due, so that if there are technical issues late at night that prohibit you from submitting an application, please email us explaining the issues with screenshots so we can help you after the deadline. Grant staff do an initial review of all applications that are submitted after the July 1st deadline and will reach out to applicants who are missing required documents or information in July and August. Now my colleague Alex Anderson will talk about program eligibility.
Thanks, Stacy. If you're considering applying to the grant program, the first step is to determine whether your proposal is eligible for funding through this grant. The AAHPP grant can be awarded to nonprofit organizations, local governments, business entities, private individuals, and state and federal agencies. If you are a past applicant or past or current awardee, there are no restrictions on reapplying every year. Even though anyone can apply, there are certain eligibility requirements that applicants must meet, which I'll go into next. Applicants must demonstrate that they are eligible to receive a grant from the state. All applicants, except individuals, must be registered with the Maryland State Department of Assessments and Taxation, also known as SDAT, and be in good standing with the state to apply. Check this website on the slide for your organization or business if you intend to apply. There is time between now and July 1st to get in good standing with SDAT if you are not already. Nonprofits, local governments, and business entities applying for the grant must provide organizational documents in their application. This includes bylaws, articles of incorporation, and proof of nonprofit status from the IRS. If you are a church or fraternal organization, this may be an umbrella letter from the parent organization. Take the time now to locate these documents. As a reminder, the links from this presentation are found in the grant guidelines and webinar slides on the MHT program website. Your property does not have to be historic or have any specific historic designation to be eligible. However, It should have a strong connection to African American heritage and history in Maryland. Past awards have gone to a wide variety of sites, including houses, churches, community centers, barns, schools, museums, hotels, and cemeteries. If you're unsure if your site or project is eligible, please contact grant staff to discuss it. In order for your application to be considered, MHT must have consent from the property owner to do the project and their willingness to convey an easement. Not every property will have to convey an easement, but every applicant must submit a signed letter. A property owner consent letter template is available on the program website to download. It must be signed by the property owner and submitted with the application. Please be advised that if you are still required to submit this letter, even if the applicant is the owner or if the property already has an existing easement with the Maryland Historical Trust. MHT will use the property listing in SSTAT to confirm the name of the property owner. MHT will then compare this information with what is provided in the letter of property owner consent. If MHT cannot find your property on the SSTAT website, or your information does not match what you have provided, your application may not be considered for funding. Please check to ensure there are no issues. Now, Stacy will talk more specifically about eligible activities.
Thank you. So there are 4 broad categories of eligible activities: acquisition, restoration or rehabilitation, new construction, and pre-development. All activities must be construction related. For an acquisition grant, the acquisition of the property must directly contribute to its preservation and protection. Think about how funding your organization's acquisition of a property will help preserve it. Acquisition grant applications can also request funds for restoration or rehabilitation projects. Funding acquisition through the grant requires careful planning. The settlement date and the availability of funding must align closely. A seller must be willing to wait for the funds to be awarded, which will not happen for this round until 2027. Please reach out to us to discuss your acquisition application before applying. The most common application activity is for rehabilitation or restoration projects. If your site is historic, the rehabilitation or restoration work should emphasize the protection of the property and the repair of important historic or original features and materials. Rehabilitation work can include the repair of historic siding, masonry repairs such as repointing, foundation repairs, roof repairs or replacement, structural work, and carpentry work such as wood flooring, windows, and doors. Work items such as accessibility upgrades, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing upgrades, lighting, drainage improvements, and other site work, as well as kitchen and bathroom upgrades, are also eligible under this grant and would fall under this category. New construction is also eligible under this grant program. Whether you're looking to construct a brand new building or put an addition on an existing structure, the grant can fund these types of projects. Even if your site needs a small outbuilding like a restroom or a pavilion, these projects are eligible for the grant. If you're planning both rehabilitation work and new construction, the grant request should prioritize the urgent needs of the existing building over the construction of anything new. Pre-development is also eligible for the grant. However, it must be necessary for a construction project to take place and must inform the construction project. Eligible pre-development activities include construction documents like building plans, archaeological surveys, historic structures reports, conditions assessments, structural engineering reports, architectural services, cemetery conservation plans, and more. In some cases, funds are awarded just for pre-development. However, to be a competitive application, pre-development activities would not be the only part of a grant application. It should be part of a larger construction project that will use the pre-development documents to inform and complete a construction project. While the grant can cover pre-development work like architectural drawings or evaluations by a structural engineer, it cannot fund more conceptual work like feasibility studies or master plans. If you're working on a site that you intend to convert into a museum or historic site, but haven't completed a feasibility study, then you will want to complete this step before you apply. It's important to determine whether any zoning changes, fire and building code requirements, or other regulations will impact the process, and much of that research can't be covered by this grant. There are a few Other project costs that are also eligible that include hiring a project manager if the grantee cannot manage the project themselves, and purchasing materials for a capital project, which can range from a few cans of paint to a fabricated monument. Rehabilitation, restoration, and new construction may require you to hire an architect, engineer, or archaeologist to develop your plans or identify priorities. Please include these potential costs in your budget for these services. If you are unclear of what type of professional services your project might require, please reach out to the grant staff for assistance. When deciding whether on your project, keep in mind the urgency of need of the work. How will it help the public access or experience your site? The project should be a discrete phase of work. If you're unsure whether your project is eligible or competitive, please get in touch with us. The goal of this grant is to fund capital-related expenses only. Project work is expected to last 15 years. The grant can't fund work that has already started, so if it's already started, it's not eligible for funding. If your site is historic, all the work that's funded by the grant must meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. If you're not familiar with the Secretary of the Interior standards, they are a set of guidelines for work on historic properties created by the National Park Service that, as a state agency, the Maryland Historical Trust is obligated to follow. In simple terms, your project must protect and retain historic features and materials. This church in Denton was in an advanced state of deterioration, but during the rehabilitation, the project ensured that its historic materials were retained. Instead of removing the old materials and replacing with new, by following the standards, there was repair and in-kind replacement when repair was not possible. So this helps to ensure with our review that your work can meet the standards. Please reach out to us if you need help understanding the standards or how your project might meet them. Not all costs or all work is eligible for funding through this grant. Here is a list of ineligible expenditures of grant funds. While not exhaustive, it includes the costs we are frequently asked about. This list includes legal fees, insurance, staff salaries, research, master plans and feasibility studies, maintenance, temporary exhibits, landscaping, and work that is not bid per the program's competitive procurement policy. A more complete list is available of eligible and ineligible costs is available in our grant guidelines, which can be accessed on our website. If you're applying for a site or a grant on a religious property, you will need to carefully consider your scope of work. While this grant funds work at many religious sites, buildings used for religious purposes are primarily funded for exterior or structural work. This is because interior spaces primarily used for religious purposes are ineligible for funding from the state. Work on features that contain religious imagery, such as stained glass windows, are also not eligible for funding. Work to spaces like hallways, bathrooms, and kitchens are generally eligible. If you're requesting funds to upgrade HVAC or electrical systems, the grant cannot cover systems that service spaces that are predominantly used for religious purposes. So please get in touch with us to discuss your religious site if you have any questions. Cemeteries are eligible for this grant program as well. Examples of cemetery projects include the repair and resetting of markers, the identification of burials through ground-penetrating radar, cemetery conservation plans, and the repair or installation of paths, walls, fences, and parking areas. Religious sites can combine work to historic places of worship and cemeteries. Now Alex will talk more specifically about how to get started on your application.
Thanks. Now let's talk about how to get started on your application and specific application questions. We suggest that applicants review the grant guidelines on the website and identify items that will take time to put together, like the letter of property owner consent, letters of support, and getting estimates to develop your budget. You can use letters of support from other grant programs or from last year's round if you're looking for funding for the same scope of work as outlined in the letters. Letters must be signed and no older than a year, or they will not be acknowledged. 2 to 6 individual letters of support are sufficient. However, if you would like to show support from a larger group, consider putting together a petition instead. Estimates can better support and justify your funding request. Applications without any estimates are much less competitive than those with them. We recommend that applicants familiarize themselves with any other state and local regulations, permits, or reviews that your project might need. For example, does your project need to go in front of a historic preservation or planning commission? These reviews may impact your project timeline. Keep in mind that these materials need to be uploaded to your application by July 1st, so ask for them soon. To download the application, you can create an account if you don't already have one. Then log in and select the application. Applicants can download a copy of the application at any point by clicking the download button at the top right corner of the application page. You can download a blank copy to use to develop answers to questions or a completed copy for your records. This is just to view the application. All applications must be submitted online through the grants portal. What type of project do you have in mind? Acquisition, rehabilitation? Think about what the most competitive project for your site will be and reach out to us to discuss it if you're unsure. What is the highest priority or the most urgent project? Please don't ask to fund a new addition when your historic building has a hole in the roof. We need to make sure to leave your property in better state than when the project started. Many applicants forget to include architectural and engineering services in their scopes and estimates. The first step for many projects is to get a conditions assessment from a structural engineer to identify critical issues and develop priorities. Others need to hire an architect to develop plans for the rehabilitation. If you are planning work that may impact a cemetery or archaeological site, ground penetrating radar or an archaeological investigation may be necessary ahead of the construction project. This is something the grant can fund, so if your building hasn't had any structural evaluation, you should include this in your scope and budget. You can reach out to grant staff if you're unsure. If the project is going to cost more than the maximum grant amount allowed of $250,000 or take longer than 2 years to complete, the project should be broken down into phases. Applicants should provide at least 10 photos of their property and the impacted project areas. This includes providing photo captions or brief descriptions. Applicants can use the photo template, which is available on the website and can be downloaded in the application to submit photos. There isn't space to upload individual photos in the application. Be sure to provide photos that show the work described in the construction project description section. The photos submitted should show the project areas and how urgent the work is. Include an overall image of the project property that provides the grant reviewer with context, along with close-up photos of the site's deteriorated features, which should clearly show the urgency of the project. Photos of your property may be used for promotional material and announcing awards, so make sure they are clear and impactful. You may also include additional photos of events, existing displays, or exhibits to better illustrate the services and intended public use and education detailed in your application. The project description is one of the heavily weighted sections of the application. You will be asked in the application to describe your project as a whole and discuss the details of the specific grant request. Be clear and concise about what the project entails and what you're asking the grant to fund. Consider the following questions while developing your project description. Is the work eligible? Is there a discrete phase of work that can be completed with the funds requested? Is the description clear enough for grant reviewers to understand? There are two parts of the project description section of the application. The first is the construction project description. This is a section where you will describe the larger vision for your project. Are you hoping to construct a new visitor center for your museum and want the grant to fund pre-development? This is where you would talk about all phases of the project from pre-development through construction. Include any phases that have already been funded by previous AAHPP grants or through other funding, even if that work is not complete. The grant project scope of work is the second section where you will lay out the specific work items you want the FY27 grant to fund. This should match the line items in your budget spreadsheet. If you have estimates for the work, this may guide your list of line items. Please do not cut and paste from an estimate, but include specific aspects of the project. For example, if you're requesting funds for slate roof replacement, you do not need to list every step and material in the roof replacement. However, you can include replace slate roof with new slate to match existing as a line item. This is specific enough to understand the work that will meet the Secretary of Interior standards and can correlate to a specific line item in your budget. To summarize, in the construction project description section, you will talk about your entire construction project, including work that the grant would not fund this round. In the grant project scope of work, you will list all the work that you want the grant to fund this round. You can see an example of a construction project description and grant project scope of work on the screen. And as you can see, the description at the top is the full description of the project, including details about the work that has been completed and the next phase of the work beyond the scope of what they are currently applying for. The grant scope of work on the bottom includes items to be accomplished if they were to be awarded with the FY27 grant. To help develop your budget, please provide an estimate for the grant scope of work. One estimate is sufficient for a service, and they're typically free. Don't forget to include estimates for pre-construction services like building conditions assessments, architectural drawings, ground penetrating radar, or archaeological investigations if your organization doesn't already have these documents on hand. Please upload all estimates to your application. Once you know how much each service will cost, you'll be able to identify project priorities and if other funding resources are needed to complete the project. Decide if your organization can manage the project or if hiring a project manager is needed to help successfully execute the project. Grantees cannot pay themselves for project management, so consider whether project management is beyond your organization's capacity. In your budget, you want to include a line item for project manager. This can also be an estimate received from an architect or general contractor. Before submitting your budget request, please ensure that all items listed in the scope of work section are included in the budget. Grant award requests should be made in $1,000 increments, not the exact dollar amount from your estimate. You want to include a little buffer to account for price increases or unforeseen project needs. Do you have other funds allocated towards this project? Do you need to put other funds toward this project? Please note that there is no match requirement for this grant. If you're receiving other funds for the project, please identify their source and amount. Whether you've done your own fundraising or working on a bond bill or applied or received other grant funds for this project, please include these in your application so the committee can see the level of funding your project has and make note of other state funding sources. If you have other state funds, please note they cannot pay for the same service as the AAHPP funds. If you have been previously awarded by an AAHP funding cycle for other phases of the project, please explain where you are in the process and how much of the grant you have left to spend, how you intend on spending the remaining funds, and how the grant you are currently applying for will help complete the project. AAHPP funding from previous years does not need to be included in the budget spreadsheet unless they are covering a portion of the project you're applying for in this round. Please contact grant staff if you have multiple sources of state funding and have questions on how to lay it out in the spreadsheet. Here is an image of the budget spreadsheet you will fill out for your project. You can download it from the MHT program website or directly from the application. You can also find this sample in the grant guidelines. Please upload your project budget spreadsheet to the application as an Excel file, not as a PDF or other file format. As you can see on the screen, there are 6 columns in the budget spreadsheet. The first is the item number. You can add as many items as your project includes. And the second column includes each work item you want to fund. Then the third column with the green header is where you will list the funds you are requesting from this grant, up to $250,000. In the next blue column, you can list other state funds you're receiving, like bond bills or Maryland Heritage Area grants, and what work they will cover for this project. In this example, they have a bond bill that they'll use to cover the architectural and engineering services. In the other project funds column, you can list funds from non-state sources like fundraising or rental income. Use the last column to total each line item. Projects that would be ready to start quickly after awarded are preferred and would make your application more competitive. When putting together your project schedule, consider the following questions and refer to the grant guidelines for more information. Will your project be ready to start as soon as the grant paperwork is complete? What are the phases of your project? Have you included time for design, permits, and hiring? Can you finish within the 2-year grant period? Your project schedule should take into account project phasing, your site schedule, local reviews and permits, MHT approvals, and the procurement process required for this grant. Specific considerations including the timing of on-site events like festivals, memorials, and regular operational schedules and seasonal rentals. If your project requires special local approvals or needs approval from the MHT Easement Committee, these processes should be incorporated into your timing. It is also important to keep in mind that all work this grant pays for must be competitively bid, their process approved by MHT, which can take 30 to 45 days to complete. Please know your project won't start right away. However, we can anticipate that most projects can be completed within the 2-year period. This is a sample timeline in Exhibit 2 of the grant guidelines that you can customize in your application. A heavily weighted section of the application is the urgency of the project. Is your site threatened by development or demolition? Is there a major roof leak or crack in the foundation? Has a significant property finally come up for sale? Would your project be ready to start as soon as any funding is awarded? Why should your project be prioritized for funding this year? Your application should address these questions and explain the urgency of your project. Another heavily weighted section of the application is historical and cultural significance. In this section, you will want to write a compelling narrative about how your site conveys the African American experience in Maryland. Assume grant reviewers are not familiar with your site, and share the most significant pieces of your site or organization's story. If your site has any historic documentation like brochures, landmark designation reports, MIHP forms, or National Register nominations, you can include the most important portions in your submission. Be sure to share any historical and cultural information beyond what is available in these documents. The meaning of a place to its community can change over time, so be sure to explain what the property means to the community today. In this section, you will also want to address how your organizations uses your site to share African American history and culture with the public. What types of public programming does your organization provide? What would the grant-funded project allow your organization to do that they cannot now? For example, Can grant funds help your organization fix the roof on your building so you can host events or provide space for a museum display? In this section, you will need to address the public benefit your site provides to the broader community. Are you a church who prepares meals for the needy in your community, but you need more space for a larger kitchen? Is your historic site in need of accessibility upgrades so more people can access the site? It's important to highlight how your site or organization provides a public benefit or educational experience that enhances the knowledge of African American history and culture in Maryland. If you have information about attendance of previous events or how you plan to promote programming, educational events, and services, please include that in your application. While all applications that are considered by the review committee meet the basic eligibility requirements of the program, applications need to have a well-developed significance, education, and public benefit section to complement a strong scope of work to be competitive. Each year, the MCAAHC selects a special topic through the Association for the Study of African American Life and History that should be addressed by applicants. For FY27, the theme is A Century of Black History Commemorations. This section provides an opportunity to discuss how your site is involved in the Black History commemorations and how your project will help to support these efforts in the future. Now, Stacy will talk about grant administration.
Thank you. In this section, we'll discuss the grant administration schedule, grant paperwork, and conveying an easement. The application is live and the link to it is available on our website. The application is due at 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, July 1st of 2026. By late December of 2026, we anticipate notifying the selected awardees about their grant. All applicants will be notified of the award decisions in January of 2027. Awardees will complete grant paperwork in the beginning of 2027, and funds cannot be used until that paperwork is complete and grant staff have approved the procurement and work. Since we are working with a 2-year timeline, the anticipated grant project completion date is December of 2028. Now let's talk about easements. The Maryland Historical Trust may take a historic preservation easement on your property if a grant is awarded. If your property already has an easement, that easement may be modified if an award is accepted. Only historic properties that are listed on or eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places are considered for an easement. Please note that not all properties will meet this requirement or be considered for an easement, and applicants do not need to have an easement on their property to apply. What is an easement? An easement is a legal contract, or preservation easement is a legal contract between the Maryland Historical Trust and the property owner. The easement is recorded in the local land records and stays with the property for a set amount of time. The easement helps protect buildings, structures, and associated archaeological resources on the property. It requires MHT approval of work on the property before it begins. The easement boundary, or parts of the property the easement will protect, is determined by MHT easement staff after the application deadline and before the award announcement are made. For any property where MHT takes a preservation easement, the property owner must notify MHT of proposed changes before the work is undertaken. The owner must maintain the property in good condition. Insurance may be required to convey an easement, and this is a cost that is not covered by grant funds. For your grant application, you need to include the property owner letter of consent to prove that the property owner agrees to the project and the potential conveyance of an easement to the Maryland Historical Trust. Since the easement must be conveyed before work begins or grant funds are dispersed, it will add to your timeline if your site is not already protected by an easement but eligible. Legal fees related to drafting the easement are not eligible for grant funds. These fees will vary depending on the size and complexity of the property. A previously recorded webinar about easements can be found on MHT's YouTube channel. You can also find the MHT easement program website link and email address on the slide. Please reach out if you have any easement-related questions. What else should you know before applying? If you are awarded a grant, all work must be approved by MHT before construction starts. Grant funds can only pay for contractors and services hired through a competitive procurement process approved by grant staff. And MHT can only pay the grantee directly, who will then be responsible for paying the contractors. Payments are made for completed work or for deposits on approved contracts. If awarded, your project monitor, one of the grant staff, will work with you on the procurement process and other facets of the grant. We'll wrap up this section with the selection process and grant selection criteria. Multiple selection criteria will be used to rank your application. There is more information in the grant guidelines and the scoring rubric at the back of the grant guidelines about how the criteria is considered for each section of the application. Again, the most heavily weighted sections of the application are significance, urgency, public benefit, and project description. After the deadline of July 1st, grant staff will review the applications and confirm program eligibility. If your application is missing an attachment, or if we need more information about your organization, we will reach out to you over the summer. Please be sure that the email address and primary contact on your application is prepared to respond to emails throughout this process. In the fall, eligible and complete applications will be provided to the Grant Review Committee to rank and review. Recommended projects will be presented to the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture and Maryland Historical Trust boards. Then the Secretary of Planning will make a final approval, and award notifications are emailed in December. A full timeline is available in the grant guidelines. Now Alex will close out with some helpful application tips and resources.
Successful applications provide clear goals for the project and demonstrate how your organization's goals align with the goals of MCAAHC and MHT. Reviewers want to understand how your project or property will be sustained over time. Reviewers also appreciate understanding the level of community support your project has, so don't forget to ask for and submit letters of support from community leaders. Estimates included in the application and guiding your budget will also assure reviewers of your project's readiness and your ability to manage the grant if it were to be awarded to you. If you have previous AAHPP awards, do not forget to explain where you are in the process and your next steps for completing the project. Make sure that you are familiar with the grant guidelines and scoring rubric that is included in Exhibit 7 of the grant guidelines, so you don't miss any critical sections of the application. And finally, make sure that your application contains clear and concise responses to each question, so it's easy for reviewers to understand all aspects of the project. Don't leave any sections blank. Prepare your answers to the application questions in a Word document and paste them into the online application. Here's the program's new website where you can get basic program information and access to the application. The blue box at the bottom of the page has information on how to access the application. To start a new application, you will need to use the links in the blue box to create an individual organizational application, shown here by the blue arrow. Once you have created an application that you can access it to update through the grant portal link shown here by the red arrow. You can also scroll to the bottom of the page to find the grant guidelines, template documents, and a link to the MHT blog that details past awardees. We highly recommend that you review the grant guidelines as it contains helpful information on the application, the rubric, scoring, how to answer questions, and sample timelines. Visit the How to Apply for a Grant page to access the grant portal, for information on how to use the grant portal, and for information on other funding opportunities through MHT. I know this was a lot of information, so thank you for sticking with us through this webinar. Here's our contact information so you can get in touch with us. Please reach out if you have any questions about this program or a potential application. Thank you and good luck.